Today we start our 24-25 NHL season preview series. We're going to go back and start with teams in the Atlantic, just like we did with the GM Report Card series. Today we start with the Montreal Canadiens. They've made some substantial changes. Will they take a step this year? We'll analyze what to expect and give my thoughts on the team season coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're looking at our season preview series. We're kicking things off with the Montreal Canadiens. We're going to start with our Atlantic Division teams, and then we'll jump over to some Western ones and kind of follow the same path here that we did with our last series that just wrapped up, the GM Report Card series, where we analyzed all the work that was done in the offseason. Now we take a look ahead. We've already analyzed that work. Today we kind of look at where things are at, and kind of give you an idea of what to expect from each team coming up this year, and then I'll give you my thoughts and analysis on how I think the season's going to go. So first, we're going to recap a little bit of last year, take a look at the results for the team, the top scorers, and the recent playoff, or lack thereof, histories, and look at their streak, where things sit. Take a look at their additions and subtractions, some key rookies to watch going into the year, some potential lineups, and some trade candidates and how we see things playing out. So let's first get started with the 23-24 quick recap here of last year. The Montreal Canadiens, of course, finished with a record of 30, 36, and 16. They were last place in the Atlantic Division with 76 points. They scored 236 goals, which was 26th best, while giving up 289 goals, which was 28th best. So obviously scoring was not good enough. Keeping the puck out of their net, also not good enough. Special teams were not great either. 17.5% on the power play, 76.5% on the PK. So again, not a great season. It was another very much injury-riddled year. They lost Kirby Dach a few games in, and things kind of spiraled from there. For as far as their streak now with playoffs missing or making, they've now missed 3 consecutive seasons. The last time we did see them would have been in the during the bubble playoffs when they went to the Stanley Cup final. And that weird year, it was an unusual season, of course, where they were in the North Division and ended up playing the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Stanley Cup final, playing teams like Vegas in the third round. It was a weird setup, but it had to work that way for restriction reasons. And that's the last time we've seen Montreal in a playoff format. It's been 3 years now, and obviously they're looking to take things a step forward. Analyzing their top scorers from last year, they were led by captain Nick Suzuki with 77 points. Cole Caulfield had 65 points. Matheson had 62 points. Real good year for him. Slafkovsky broke through, especially in the second half, with 50 points. Monahan, 35 points as well in 5th place there. So certainly some good years from their top young core guys for sure. Nice to see them break through. Slafkovsky really kind of pushed through once he got to play more in the top 6 role, playing a lot with Caulfield and Suzuki. Currently, with their salary cap, they're theoretically above the cap in theory, but they do have LTIR options. They're not sitting at $90 million in payroll, which puts them $2 million above, but they do have the Carey Price contract for LTIR, and I believe Raphael Harvey-Pinard likely starting the year as an LTIR eligible player as well. So obviously they have the ability to be cap compliant here, but in theory they are above the cap. So we'll see how things go. I think they would like to reduce that if they could. Looking at how the team has changed, the additions and subtractions for this team, no longer with the club that were significant enough players from last year were Sean Monahan, Jordan Harrison, Jonathan Kovacevic, both a couple young defensemen that were moved out. Tanner Pearson, Colin White was there for a short spell. Jesse Yellinen was not brought back as a RFA unqualified. So nothing too substantial, but the main thing, Monahan, who played an important role, of course, was traded partway through the season. In theory, he was gone before the deadline. We don't always include those players in this kind of video, but he was an important piece there. And it's a Harrison, Kovacevic, a couple of the young D that were moved out to make room for some of the other guys, since they have so many good young defensemen. Coming into the team, the main addition is Patrick Laine, who they, of course, picked up in a significant trade just not long ago, of course, well into the month of August. Alex Barré-Boulet was one of the few players they signed as a free agent contract. He may or may not even be in the NHL lineup. He very well could be somebody who plays in Laval and as somebody with some experience as a call-up option. As far as rookies to watch this year, I think Montreal has a decent amount of these guys that can you can bank to get at least some NHL games now in this series. When I say, rookies to keep an eye out for, these are guys that I feel are not necessarily their absolute top prospects. In some cases, they will be, but this is more about rookies that I see getting games and actually having a chance to be impactful this year. Like in the case of Montreal, they're arguably the top prospects, Ivan Demidov. I don't have him on this list because we know he's not playing this year. He's going to be over in Russia. So these are rookies that you're looking to see get games, maybe, throughout the year, either at the start of the year, grab a spot and maybe keep it, or get enough games throughout the year that they'll be a significant piece. And some of the main one to me, I think will have the most impact is Lane Hudson. I do expect him to get a decent amount of NHL time, but as you'll see when we look at the projected lineup here in a couple minutes, there's still a logjam of D. So I'm not sure how things will be handled with Hudson. I do think it's quite plausible to think he'll spend some time in the minors. At least it's quite possible, but I wouldn't be shocked if when he does play that he's going to be impactful. I would think Owen Beck has a decent chance as well of making the roster this year. I wouldn't be shocked if he made it out of training camp, but it's going to be challenging for guys like Beck and Joshua Waugh, who I also list here as a potential rookie impactful player with all the veterans that they have now, and like they really didn't move on from any of their veterans that don't have a long future here. So it's going to be challenging to see how that impacts some of these guys' opportunities. And it wouldn't be shocking for me to see Logan Mailloux have a real good camp, force his way into the conversation. Maybe he starts the year in Montreal, maybe he doesn't, but regardless, I do see him getting games this year and having a shot at being impactful to this team at some course of the year. As far as guys that are pending RFA or UFA, so these are players you might see sign contract extensions throughout the year. It could also mean guys that are traded. When players are in the final year of their contract, they are always more likely to be dealt because it's easier from a contractual cap perspective. But, the RFAs not so much, but especially the UFAs. As far as pending UFAs on this team, you've got Christian Dvorak, Noel Armia, Jake Evans, and David Savard, as well as Alex Barré-Boulet, who they just signed as a one-year deal. So he's, once again, pending unrestricted free agency. So, obviously, amongst those five, you got one defenseman and four forwards there. I wouldn't be shocked if any of those guys were traded too, right? They are all players that I would list as trade candidates. A guy like Jake Evans, been a pretty good player for them. But I can see a guy like Owen Beck being somebody who maybe takes his roster spot. Maybe if they feel he's far enough along, that it's bound to happen eventually. I just don't know when, right? Dvorak and Armia, I don't see as having long futures in this organization either. Whether or not they, stay the course of the year, traded at the deadline, or they walk next offseason, I'm not sure. But again, players that, the Habs could talk to about extensions, or they could be more likely trade candidates. On the RFA side of things, players that need new contracts after the year include defenseman Jaden Struble, goaltender Caden Primo, and young forward Raviel Harvey Pinard, who, like I said, starting the year injured this year and has 1 year left on his contract. So looking at who's going to be on this team this coming season, well, for starters, let's look at the goaltenders. That's pretty easy. You got Samuel Montembeault and Caden Primo will make up the goaltending tandem. Obviously, Jake Allen was moved late last season, so the three-headed goalie monster that they ran with for a big chunk of last year is no more, which is good. These two young goalies will have the crease to run with, and we'll see. Obviously, Montembeault will have the edge as far as being the starter goes, but, if Primo plays well, he can play himself into more games and make this more of a 1A, 1B scenario. On the blue line, you got Mike Matheson, Caden Gooley, David Savard, Arbor Jacki, Justin Barron, Jaden Struble, and then you got the two youngsters that don't have much experience yet, Logan Mailloux and Lane Hudson. So those are your 8D. Now, out of the 8, your 6 guys are going to probably play the most. Probably will be Matheson, Gooley, Savard, Jacki, Barron, Struble. They do, I think, have an edge when it comes to experience and stuff. Obviously, when it comes to the cap and everything, you're going to look at who is needing waivers to go to the minors and who doesn't. That'll play a role here as well. All those things will come into play, but those are your 8D that we're going to see this year, depending on injuries. And like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if Savard is moved at some point through the season as well. In the forward group, you've got Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield and Uri Slafkovsky are probably going to be your top line. I suspect they're going to give Kirby Dach an opportunity here to be on the second line, probably with players like Laine and Newhook. You're probably looking at between your third and fourth lines, you're going to have players like Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher, probably be your two right wingers in your bottom six. You've got Armia and Raphael Harvey-Pinard, when he's healthy, will get every opportunity to play. You get Evans and Dufour probably going to be your centers. Michael Pezzetta is going to be in the mix there as well. And then maybe Beret-Boulet. But then you got Joshua Waugh, who I do feel has an opportunity to maybe start the year with a roster spot. But again, like I said, all those guys, do you have a bit of a logjam on both the back end and the forward end? Now, on the back end, it's not going to be as much of a rush to make any more moves. They've already moved Kovacevic and Harris. They just, a lot of these guys are new and inexperienced, so they're not going to want to, just move them on, right? They've done that with a few already. A guy like Savard and Matheson is the only real experience they have there. So, like I said, could Savard be moved later this year? Maybe. Wouldn't even be shocked if they decided to extend him for an extra year or something too, because really it's going to boil down to, I think they're going to probably look at what's the trade value versus the value that he can provide as being a good teacher for these young D. Ultimately, his role is going to probably change over time, but the same thing here, there's no need to rush. Guys like Mailloux and Hudson, if they need to spend some time in the minors, not a big deal. But in the forward group, you've got a lot of veterans there that are kind of taking up spots. When it comes to Armia and Dvorak, and to some degree, you could make that argument about Anderson and Gallagher too. But they obviously are taking up ice time for guys like Owen Beck and Joshua Waugh and, all these guys that are looking for spots here, right? So I'd be curious to see what the Canadiens do. But those are the players you're going to see a lot this year. As far as the top questions facing the franchise, for me, is can you unload at least some of these veterans between training camp and the beginning of the year to allow these young guys more of an opportunity. There's no rush, really. Beck and Waugh, would be the main two in the forward group. I think they can play, to be completely honest. But again, Harvey-Pinard's going to be out injured. Beret-Boulet is certainly someone who could be an extra, go to the minors if need be, or on waivers. So you're going to have an opportunity there, but I wonder if between Dvorak, Armia, and Evans, if one of them is moved, at least one, if not one or two, before the start of the season. To me, that's the biggest question facing this team is, can they unload a couple of veterans here to make room for some young guys? And then, of course, they can also allow them to be more cap compliant without needing LTIR. They would likely prefer to not be in long-term injury reserve if they can help it, because they don't accrue cap space. It makes it a lot more challenging to navigate the cap throughout the year. The other big question is, can this roster play meaningful games late in the year or challenge for playoffs? And to be honest, I think they can play meaningful games later in the year. I don't see them jumping all the way up to a playoff team just yet. The big question here for me is looking at it and saying, okay, looking at the teams that were ahead of them last year, which is all 7 teams in this division, you'd have to jump over about 4 of them to get into a playoff spot, right, to be in the top 4, based on how the playoffs went down last year. Now, is it possible the Atlantic Division could be strong enough to send 5 teams to the playoffs this year? That wouldn't be completely unreasonable. Looking at the Atlantic versus the Metro, I could see that scenario playing out. But even then, you're going to have to be at least in 5th. You were in 8th last year, so you're jumping over, 3 teams. All right, is that plausible? They could at least jump ahead of all of Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa. I don't know. I don't think that's reasonable. And then, of course, you got Tampa and Florida, Toronto, Boston. It's a big jump. So yes, are they going to be more fun to watch than ever? Sure. Are they going to be improved from last year? I really think they will be. But they have a lot of youth on this team still, and there's still a lot of growing pains to go through. The goaltending is, wasn't great last year, to be honest. Montembeault had his moments when he was really good, but looking at the numbers are just not good, and it's more than just goaltending. It's team defense too. But, it's difficult to say if they can really keep that out. They could have a hot start, but even then, don't let a hot start fool you. There's teams that have hot starts every year and miss the playoffs. But I do think they'll be able to move up in the standings to some degree. Instead of being in last, could they move up 1 or 2 spots? That seems reasonable to me. Will some of these guys as individuals take steps? Absolutely. I can see Slafkovsky going up another level. Caulfield maybe can stay healthy and maybe hit 40 goals. What will Laine be back? He's a big X factor here in all this. There's lots of question marks on this team. And the other big thing, too, and it seems to have haunted them for a few years now, is can they stay healthy? I'm not sure what it is, but can this team stay healthy? Because in the last few years, they have missed a lot of man games. So that's a big question mark, too. That's hard to predict because it's awfully hard to take those steps forward if some of your key people end up with significant injuries again. But yes, the Montreal Canadiens, I think, will be a really fun, exciting team to watch. There's a lot of good young talent that's already there and expected to take steps. You've got more young talent joining in. They'll definitely be one of the more fun, exciting teams to watch. I don't know that they get all the way into making playoffs just yet, but like I said, I do think they can move up the standings to some degree and at the very least make it more interesting and be playing meaningful games much later into the year so that we're not, by January going, okay, well, these 3 teams are out or something like that. I think it'll be very, very interesting to see how they can compete, especially with the other teams that have been rebuilding for a while, your Detroits, your Buffaloes, your Ottawas, like that bottom 4 of the division. How will that dynamic change this year with Montreal seemingly ready to take a step? So let me know what you think on the upcoming season for the Montreal Canadiens. What do you expect? Let me know which players you're looking forward to most seeing. What are the top questions you feel facing this team going into the upcoming 24-25 campaign? Thank you very much for watching, and of course, stay tuned for all the rest of the teams coming in this series. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.